You can be less formal.
Well,
Hi, I'm Suzanne Volmer, and this is Everybody's an Artist.
okay.
And then,
Hi, I'm Suzanne Volmer, and this is Everybody is an Artist, or Everybody's an Artist. And this is our first podcast, and I'm speaking with Chaska England, who is my assistant and friend and fellow artist and designer. And we'll do an interview first with her and a conversation. And technically speaking, this is our coffee break time when we talk about ideas, and we're just sharing that with you. So yes, this is our coffee break time. And so Chaska, you've been designing some really interesting things that I totally love. Like I love your hoodies and just the visual vocabulary with that. And tell me a little bit about it and what inspired you.
well,
Or why you're making hoodies to begin with.
my hoodies are the brainchild of wanting to quilt, but not wanting to generate a whole quilt. And it's also a desire to do applique without repetition. Now, there's a lot of in the textile world and in the quilting world, a lot of breaking out of the mold. So we're seeing a lot of fun, colorful, bright, sometimes scandalous and thought-provoking patterns coming out. And so I'm just taking those patterns and putting them on hoodies for the streets.
What I think is interesting about that is your business is called Chaska's Quilt Spot. And people have this preconception of what quilting is. They think of it as very kind of neat and organized and a little and so retro that like your mom does it, but what do we do in a contemporary kind of way? And what interests me about your work is it's just you are very precise, and you can make those kinds of quilts with very clean edges and very precise lines, but you're not thinking in that way. Like you've learned that skill and now you're just kind of morphing it into something different, which I really like, because I think you can see the skill level, but at the same time it's in a totally unexpected context. And I like that it's streetwear, because I think people we want to show who we are when we are walking on the street, and fashion is really fun. And some of this, I know, is inspired by the music that you listen to and so forth. It fits into like the hip hop world. I think that's really interesting. And I just want to talk for a little minute about the fabrics that are in this particular hoodie that you made. I thought it was very just, when you choose to make a design and you choose fabrics to do it with, it's really interesting the way you've used lace in some places, and the way you've made the rhythms of the design of fabric play in with the designs of the lace, which you wouldn't have had anything to do with making. So this idea of reuse is really interesting to me. Also really interesting to me is you are not buying any fabrics. These are all repurposed fabrics.
Or donated
fabrics. And, so I like that that connection of using stuff up in the world, but saying something completely new with it. And so there is kind of this history that everything carries, but it is put into a completely different context. And
when I do buy fabric, it's on consignment at a local fabric consignment shop. So even still, when I'm buying fabric, it's not being bought used off the bolt. It's being bought 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago and finally ending up in my hands.
And when I buy fabric, because I like to sew too, and sewing is actually an aspect of some kinds of not sewing exactly, but a vocabulary of dressmaking can be seen in my most recent work too. I collect it and I save it. I find it somewhere, I save it, but I frequently buy it. And so I like the fact that there are places that you can go that people are selling, you know, things that people have collected over the years and they didn't do anything with it. And then you're making something quite interesting. And lately you've been talking to me about Japanese influences inspiring you, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, their streetwear, it's mixed with tech wear, so it makes it baggy and beyond functional. So you can pull something on your shoulder and your phone will slip out of a hidden compartment in your wrist, and then you can immediately have your phone up and ready and in front of you. So on top of, they love the hip hop and the street scene. Due to the constraints of their society, they're breaking free, and they're doing it with dance and clothing, and they're doing it with American hip hop, which is incredible. I mean, who would have thought that that's what direction it would have taken?
I've often been very inspired in my work with Japanese influences also, and I work with porcelain a lot, and but in a very, very contemporary way. And but things that you learn about that as a material, you go back to a very early genesis of that use of that material. And I also know a lot about fabric design too, and construction in Japan. And I think it's just interesting because it's a whole like you were saying, a very formalized culture. So the designs have, they're very different, you know, if it's porcelain culture because it relates to the tea ceremony. But, you know, dress is very mannered. There's symbolism in every single thing. And I love what you're saying about, you know, in contemporary clothing, kind of a pocket for everything, because very, like, I know they put a lot of thought into the engineering of clothing with many pockets, but at the same time, it's often marketed to a very general public, so it doesn't have a lot of personality to it. And I like that your pieces really display somebody's personality or the energy of who they are. Because I find when I've actually been looking at all this stuff with many pockets, just so you don't have to carry a pocketbook. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking, well, that needs to be augmented with something, you know, that needs to be a little bit more exciting. So I think that's interesting that you have thought about all of that, because that's exactly what I thought was missing from that kind of clothing.
My ascent into designer and fashion is slow. It's more research-based than experimentation, which is what I'm used to. I'm used to like seeing a pattern, experimenting with it, and working with it until it no longer exists. And then instead, this way, I'm collecting information off the internet and various sources on Instagram so I can understand what the current cutting edge of tech wear and hip-hop streetwear really is about.
And it's interesting when you sort of look at what people are wearing. There are different YouTube things that will show, you know, what people are wearing on the street and everything. But I feel when we're talking about everybody's an artist, it's that's really the creativity that we can all bring to our everyday life. And one of the things that I really, you know, we talked about what would be the title for the show. Mm-hmm. And actually you came up with the title for the show, and that was really good that you came up with the title for it. And I can see positive and negatives to that as a title, because I'm not sure that everybody can, you know, I don't know that everybody is like a spectacular artist, but I think everybody can be creative, and I think creativity is expressed in many ways. And when you came up with this title, Everybody is an Artist, if you think of like the root of where your fashion aesthetic is, it fits so well, because you're making these things that are meant to intensify the personality of the person or make their personality to be read on the street, to be interpreted by an audience, by passersby. The world is an audience, basically, and clothing is a form of communication. I once taught a class and developed the class because I make textiles too, and it was called Pattern as a Language in Art, and it's really was about, you know, all different kinds of patterning and how people use that and what it communicates. And because I didn't want people to think of pattern as sort of boring, and since then we see a lot more multiculturalism in fabric stores, and even if something is a single color, like what color you choose and then what you make it out of and that kind of stuff is, I think, the creative part of it, and everybody has a little bit of the creativity in them. But what I wanted to say about what you do, and what I'm interested about what you do, is it's just not like you know, that Sunday morning quilt show, which I do watch on PBS once in a while, but I think it's very precious in its way, and they're clothes I would never ever wear. So things I see that you design, I think, oh, I would wear that, that's really cool. And you know, and your generation too, somebody would wear that. So I think that's interesting, and also interesting that you, speaking of Japanese things, made the Noren screens for
the curtains for the local sushi place that outgrew its cafe-sized restaurant and moved into a main street. They asked me to make the Noren curtains, and that was interesting. I got to learn a little bit about the history of Noren, and now I'm on my own little Noren. Now that it's winter here in the Northeast, I'm definitely considering insulated sashiko Noren for my own personal use, just for the warmth, because the breeze coming out of my window at 1 a.m. when it's 28 degrees, which for those more northern than I, that's nothing, but for me, that's after it's been 60 for a day, it's uncomfortable. So.
Actually, that's such a great idea, because I was thinking, you know, around here we have things you can, like plastic you can put on the windows and everything, but that's so boring. Or if you do use drapes or curtains, it's just such a big commitment to that, and it's sometimes not really that much fun, you know. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, though, because when I was talking about these, you know, Sunday morning programs about quilting and stuff, they always seem to come out of places like Wisconsin and Dakota, and I realized that as a visual culture, you know, they're really about padding their world so they can stay warm inside their house. And a movie I loved watching was, when it came out a long time ago, was Fargo, because Fargo was shot in this way that the snow and the landscape would be completely covered, blanketed by white, and you'd only see like little things like parking meters or something sticking up, and you wouldn't even see the ripple of like where the highway was, and you realize you lose all definition of landscape. And where we are, we're right by the ocean, and so we do see landscape, and oftentimes maritime climates you get a little bit less snow. But I remember I came here once in the wintertime, and it was a huge snowstorm the first time I came to New Bedford, and the streets were really well plowed. Even the cobblestone streets were really well plowed, and I realized that's because it's like the biggest fishing industry, and everybody knows how to do stuff here. And I was amazed, because my editor said to me, well, you know, we want you to go to the Star Store and cover this exhibition. And I said, okay, thinking, you know, like that's a little risky on the snowiest day of the year. And they had icebreakers in the harbor, like ships, you know, the ice-breaking ships. And that was on the radio as I was coming here, and I thought to myself, oh boy, this is really going to be something. And what are the roads going to be like? And the roads were immaculate, and it was really funny. I am not looking forward to the winter, but that is, I like that people are very capable here. And the other thing I think is really great is we're behind the hurricane barrier. And the hurricane barrier, I love the way, like, if we do have a storm, like, people have the skill here to work it like a dike, letting water in, letting out, keeping like the water the same way. And I was listening to something on the radio, and they were saying that Boston did not have this, but this is something that they needed because they've built on the land that was the Big Dig, all these skyscrapers, and everything is very vulnerable every time that they have a situation where the water would rise. And I can see us being like the Netherlands. You know, I can see that that kind of technology is really helpful. And you know, and actually I believe it's I think it's a company from the Netherlands that's doing the wind energy stuff that's happening here also. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, that's
kind of
being disputed right now. So last I heard that there might be not complete pulling out, but some hesitation in putting the windmills over here in New Bedford.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because we love our whales, despite almost hunting them to extinction.
Right. Well, that will be interesting to see how that plays out, because I think I think there are aspects of the wind farm that are going to go forward anyway, which is, but it is always going to have the points of controversy about it. And I think there is a way, if we just think about it hard enough, to be able to make things that are energy renewable resources and not hurt things. But if you just make quick answers and not be that creative about it, then you can be destructive. And one of the things we were saying, everybody's an artist and everybody's a designer. You know, you think back to sort of times of great invention, and it's just interesting what, you know, like the Victorian era, so much was invented during that era. Some of it was really stupid and very
Lead paint walls.
Yes, lead paint walls and other, arsenic in wallpaper. That's a big one. And so that was very interesting to me, like, you know, arsenic in wallpaper design. And I think I went to Mark Twain's house, and one of the things I loved about taking a walk through that house was all of the shimmery wallpapers that are kind of dark green and have foiling on them. And they have still the gas lamps working in the house and everything. And then later, I heard that that dark green has arsenic in it, and then the foiling has, I think, mercury in it. So it's, yeah, different kinds of things. But to switch subjects, you work with all natural fabrics, don't you?
I try to. I'm starting to find polyester in my studio somehow.
Yeah. Sometimes lace is polyester.
That's what it is.
Yeah. I like some of the sheer fabrics and stuff, the crinolines that I'm using in my work, and sometimes that's lace, sometimes that's silk, and sometimes that is not. And, you know, what attracts me is the color. And so it's, you know, sort of a mix of things that you might use and to make a statement. But what, and you've been doing some pop-ups and some craft sales and things like that, but more and more are going to be doing things within the building, because one of the things you said to me was you really wanted to have people come to you and have them see, in part, you know, the way you make things, but also have them know where you are in the world. And
New Bedford's my hometown. I just want people to come to New Bedford.
Yeah.
I think like 4 or something generations of my family were born in or very near to New Bedford. I think one member of my family was born just before there was a hospital in New Bedford. If he had been born like a year later, he would have been born within New Bedford. But there wasn't a hospital yet to be born in, so.
Well, I think this is an interesting place because it's sort of, it's just, I would just say very colorful, you know. It can be like a lot of different things happening. And easygoing, because like, there's a thing about being in a coastal place that it's a little bit more laid back, but actually people are very, the art scene here, they're directed toward what they do, and but you have to be, I know as an artist myself, oftentimes you're like Willie Loman, you know, you go job to job and you're kind of a traveling salesman a little bit for what you do, because you're working with galleries and you're working with, you know, individual projects that are site specific. And in a way, when somebody is a craftsperson or they're designing for somebody, you're going into the world wherever they need something. So if it was the world of hip hop, you're going more into the music scene and custom doing something for somebody. And the beautiful part of like this program is we can reach out to all of you and we can tell you what we do. You can find us and we can get something to you, to basically enhance your world. And I have all these little sayings that I say to you all the time. One of them is, you know, that I think artists have a vision of the way the world should look, and they make that in their art. And when we were talking with Alma at one time, somehow that came up also, and Alma is an artist that we know from this area. And it's just that you make the way you think the world should be, and you sort of gather all of these influences. And I see that in your work, you know. So when we're talking about quilting can be conservative, that's not your world. And so you might have those skills, but what you're creating is really out of your world. And I love that you have sewing machines in your studio from like all different eras. So you know, they redesign stuff all the time and re-engineer it, and each era has a good thing about it. So you have the one that doesn't have a motor, that you work with your feet, and then you have one that is does all these fancy stitches. And so I think it's great to have, and everything in between,
to say the least, including hand sewing, which I think is my first and true love. You know, is that hand, making sure that the needle goes into the exact point and comes out exactly where I want it, no matter how many times I poke myself in the finger, which will always be my first love. And
I do have the needles that I got for you that are the ones that you thread themselves when you're just too tired to see the hole in the needle, and you know, or thread the eye of the needle. And I think that I have them in the car, unfortunately, so I can't give them to you right now. But after our podcast, I'll give them to you, and you will just love it. It's just a different thing. And they're not the same, you know, they have their little flaws, but once in a while when you have to do something and you've been sewing forever and you feel totally blind, these threadless needles are totally perfect. And if you want to do something really, really fast and not take the time to thread the needle, they're perfect too, because all you do is you hold the needle and then you press the thread against it and it just clips it, and it's done. And so you don't have to take all that time to kind of thread it, which is, you know, interesting. But what are things that interest you? Because I'm chatting away and I'm wondering what interests you.
Geez, way to put me on the spot, Suzanne. Joke.
Well, today was your first driving test. That was a big deal. And so she's still traumatized from her first driving test. But the goal is to, you know, have wheels. And this is a city where you really don't have to have wheels. But it's sort of a good skill to have under your belt. And you know, but this was the first one.
Yeah, since I was like really like 16 or something, was the first time I really drove, and my friend took me out into the middle of nowhere and was like, all right, drive us home. And he refused to get back into the driver's seat. I was sitting there, mortified, gripping the wheel, like, please don't make me do this, Jay, please don't make me do this. And he's like, stop crying, I've been doing this since I was 10. And I'm like, I'm too young to die. Irrational sometimes.
When I was a kid and we lived in Oregon, we lived on a little bit of a rise, but in front of us was just this big flat cow field. And we lived in Corvallis, which was country at that time, and it's where the agricultural college is. And in that era, it was sort of, you had a lot of car hoppy places and everything, and it was the era of what it probably was like the early 60s, so cars looked kind of like bubbly, you know, they had like round edges and stuff. And we had a gray car, and it was in the driveway, and I think I was 3 years old, and I was with my brother, and I said, oh, let's get in the car, this will be fun, and let's make believe we're driving, that'll be fun. And I didn't accidentally, I just didn't know what stuff was, and I released the brake of the car, and it rolled down the driveway into the street. You never saw a mother run faster in your entire life, but that was my first driving experience. And then I didn't drive for a very long time until I was like 30, and then I decided I'd learn how to drive. 28, I think. And it was really, it wasn't my great skill at that moment, but all I can say is practice, and you get better. And I'm an incredibly skilled driver now, so it'll all work out in the end.
We'll see.
Oh, it will. And you'll find that, actually, there are so many driving situations around here that your skill level is going to increase pretty quickly, and you are very precise from your sewing skills. So all of this depth perception stuff will kind of click in and be very handy.
I hope so.
I think so. And but tell me, you were going to do some ideas about classes. Quilting classes?
I'm not sure about those anymore. With my new work schedule and everything, I'm trying to balance right now.
Yeah.
And my lack of room, and my lack of space, my lack of room in my schedule, and my lack of just social grace. Unlike Suzanne here, who can speak to anyone, I have to know them for at least 15 hours before I can even say their first name. It's a learning curve.
However, you remember their first name, and I often do
remember.
not.
I always remember. I'll be like, did I meet you one time? You were wearing purple pants and a polka dotted top, and your name's Bob. And you were named after your grandfather? Yeah, I thought so. I thought that was you. That's me. But getting me to talk to them?
This is why we make a really great team, because Chaska is very exacting about certain things, and other things, like really remembering people's names. I always kid around and say about art criticism that I write, like sometimes people say, well, how is it that you started to write art criticism? And I say, well, I'm not great at names, but if I have to write it 20 times in one article, then maybe I remember. And then truthfully, I often forget anyway, because I'm writing so many articles, but I never forget visual things that impress me. I never forget, what a painting looks like, what a sculpture looks like, something visual that excited me, that was different. And I will say right now that a show that I really liked, and a museum experience that I really liked recently, that still is up for the next month or so, is a show of photography works by Ellen Carey at the New Britain Museum of American Art in New Britain, Connecticut. And I will plug that show because I think she is, and throughout her career has been, a very revolutionary photographer of large format prints, and in sort of this color field way that's really pushing the medium. And she's also showing in England at uh, I can't remember like the full name of the place, but it's where photography was born. And the first photographic image that was ever made was made there, and I think
See
it's
if
so
you can
cool.
look it up on your phone. That would be perfect.
Yes, I will actually. I forget where my phone is, but it's near me somewhere.
Hold on.
Oh, it's in my bag.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm a little sore right
We'll
now.
look it up on the phone and find out, because that is it. It's such a that was a very fun, interesting exhibition to see. I love that museum. It's like a little. It has a massive collection, but it has a nice little boutique-y feel when you go in, and you feel like you can see everything in a day, like an afternoon. My other favorite museum is the Guggenheim, because you go to the top and then you're always leaving. And so these are, it takes 45 minutes to see the Guggenheim, and it takes, like a couple of hours to see this museum. But Ellen gave she gave a tremendous amount of work. This is her retrospective, and at this museum. And why that's interesting is artists hope to have a repository of where their work can be, and she has a Hartford connection, which is she's taught at the Hartford Art School for many years and still does, even though she came out of like the New York art scene. And when photography was being developed in a contemporary sense, like the early 80s, when the large format stuff was happening and people were suddenly making these big Polaroid prints with the biggest Polaroid camera that there was. She was one of the artists doing that, and it was really revolutionizing the way we see photography. And I just thought it was a really great show, and I like going there too, because the scenery is beautiful to go. It's like you're looking at the sky, and it's just like in a Hudson River School painting if you're driving north to south, to go see it. So I'm just going to look for a second and see what I have here of where her thing is. So Chaska, that gives you a chance to talk while I look. And so I guess I'd say we also loved the Maxwell MK's hut that was recently.
What an interesting artist.
Yeah.
Maxwell MK. Maxwell, spelled as it sounds, Maxwell. Now I enjoy names, given my unconventional name. MK, E-M-C-A-Y, Maxwell MK. I think he's out of Chicago. Maybe.
Yes, he is.
And what a receptive man, first of all, letting two strangers propose offering a second life for his really awesome structure without even knowing us. He never met us in person. We just emailed him out of nowhere asking if is that called a sculpture? His sculpture could be placed within our building, and he gave us reasonable pricing, kind replies, and I look forward to following his career.
Yeah, I think, so I wrote to him an email because I was interested in having him recite what was, it was a temporary project that was done under the auspices of DATMA in their shelter series 2023. And so what he made was a shelter that looked, it sort of looked like it was made out of aluminum, but when you got closer, you realized it was made out of old sails and that had been painted silver. And then on the inside, it was all small little pieces of fabric. The structure itself looked like a bus stop, but it was based on a Yoruba hut. And so it kind of made you think about Martin Puryear, it made you think about Afrofuturism, and it related to the textile history of this place. It related to quilting in a very different way. A lot of people in the city contributed parts of quilt fabric within the context of this because he had several workshops for it.
I remember the call for the public call for fabric that we did.
And it had, light in it, LED things and everything. And so it was lit at night, and that was really nice. Let's see, I think I have found it, but I think she's showing at the Laycock Abbey, which is a national preservation site at the UK, in the UK, and I'm still looking this up. But speaking of Maxwell's structure, what I loved about it is I'd drive by it, it would make me so incredibly happy to see it, and then inside, people's approaches to contributing a piece of fabric might have come from something in their lives. But a family had their images printed on one piece of fabric, and so they're in there like a little snapshot. And it really incorporated a lot of people, and it made you think of all the things that public sculpture can be. And and it was fun for you because it involved quilting in a very different concept. I do outdoor pieces too. I do ephemeral pieces, which that could be considered. And when I was speaking with Maxwell, he was on his way to Texas. So if anybody watches this that's in Texas, try to look up Maxwell MKs to find out what he's doing where you are. And he is from Chicago. I think he was maybe going to do something else in Indiana. Not Illinois, Indiana. And so I think, but I think, obviously Illinois at any time because he's from Chicago. But what we were trying to do was recite that sculpture, and it didn't quite work out in terms of the collaborative aspect of the backing for it and the citing for it. But he certainly was very giving about it, and we sure gave it a shot. And I just really loved it. It was like the happiest moment of the summers driving by that piece. And it's when you look at something and it appears to be very simple, but it's very evocative of a lot of things, that exemplifies what his work was about. And I think it just had everything, and it just had a certain magic, and it lifted people's spirits up. And the topic of shelter is a really interesting one as we talk about it being like a colder climate, because one of the things about Massachusetts is it guarantees everybody shelter in the winter, all families. And not everybody, because if you're not a family, maybe you don't get first billing for housing, but at the same time, it's the only state in the country that does feel that that's an important social mission. And so as we get colder, they're really working hard on that. And that is evolving too because of the great need for housing. But sculptures like Maxwell's piece show you that there are people in the world who don't require massive space. You don't require massive space, you just require some form of shelter. And it was really very interesting that his piece, the parts of it that he had, because it had quilting on the inside, because it was sort of nesty, it felt like a home. It felt like home, and it really made you feel a sense of belonging. And I think there are a lot of reasons for creating outdoor sculpture, and sometimes it's very aligned with the topic, and the topic was shelter, but also, you know, the magic that he did was he really identified a sense of belonging. So it wasn't just about the place that it was about what it created inside the person who's viewing it. And that's the thing that you can carry with you always. And so that comes back to what we're talking about, your work and clothing. You know, it's how people feel internally. It's what they can carry with them always. Sure, you're wearing this thing and you feel good about it. It's sort of like armor, urban armor, or a welcome mat in a certain way, you know, inviting the public in to understand you. Long before people had different colored hair, I knew somebody who was an actress who had blue hair. And she was all upset one day because she came into the studio building that I was in New York, and she said, really irritated, you know, when I walked by and the firemen were bothering me about my blue hair when I was in Gristiti shopping. And I said, well, look at it this way, you know, you wanted blue hair to make a statement, and it's just letting you know that they are responding to the statement. You are not invisible, you know, so it might have seemed like they were, you know, kind of like giving you the business about it, but you want that kind of response. And she said, yeah, you know, that's true. And I think, because I think when anybody tries to be different, there's always going to be a pushback, but it can be a good pushback that you learn how to control.
But you got to see, for people who don't choose to be different, who are just different, the pushback is painful.
Exactly.
It is the most painful thing you'll ever experience, because you can't explain to society, I'm different, and it's not my choice. And anything I do to reverse it just works against me. And society takes a look at that and chooses that you are doing that on purpose. And that is probably one of the biggest struggles as an artist.
Right. I also think I actually, you know, have a lot of views about competitive culture and not and how you should be competitive and how you shouldn't be competitive. And I think you know, oftentimes jealousy drives that when it's negative, and when it's positive, it's specifically in the arts, it's because art is a conversation, and if somebody says something, then you're building on that, and building on that, and art gets better. But when it's sometimes people want to pigeonhole you in a certain place. They have a perception of a person, or they have a perception of and they do that because that makes them feel better about themselves, to understand their world and have everybody pocketed in a certain way. And I think that's very destructive to our potential as people, because I really feel that everybody should have everybody's an artist, everybody should have the potential to create the life they want to have, and they should also not be denied a presence on the planet because somebody else doesn't consider them important. I think that is really crucial.
One of the aspects of Japanese culture that I don't think a lot of people know is that in Japanese culture, from what it seems, everybody is an artist. So, a phone call. 1 second. We'll be right back. We're back.
So we were just talking about different things, like different art happenings, different things, and this program we'll talk about a lot of different activities that we do, things we're thinking about, and highs and lows of culture and experience, because I think it's all of that makes a life. It's all of that makes a creative experience. And I think it's the history of the fabrics that you use, the different time frames of things, that then bring it into a contemporary context that's interesting to you, because you always tell me things about sort of the history of things you're doing that is, I find fun and interesting to know. And like the Noran screens. And
the curtains, the Noran curtains, I mean, it's just about, I'm more interested in learning than any one specific thing. So when I collect a new piece of information, that's very important to me. And if I find out that there's a special technique that goes with it, that just, it's the cherry on top of whatever I'm crafting. So quilting has a history, and it just, the history is so important. It really brings the gratification full circle. Not only did I create it, I understand why it came into being. I learned all the techniques, I understand its relevance, and I see its future. So.
And about that, for other people to kind of know that cycle, you would go into this sushi restaurant and just love the sushi. And of course, the person who's creating the sushi is?
William, let me think of his last name. Foley, I believe. And he has an attention to detail. His mother is Japanese from Japan, and his father is German, American German, I believe. And he is a very attentive chef, and I've been eating sushi since I was a little girl. I learned how to use chopsticks. I remember being 6 years old, eating like Frosted Flakes with a pair of chopsticks. And my dad's just like, the flakes are gonna get soggy before you finish them. And I just didn't care. So my love of Japanese cuisine comes from my father, who loves it as well. And when I walked into this restaurant, Yozakura of New Bedford, although it's moved to Acushnet, what I saw was someone, meaning William, trying to make a restaurant with his vision, and this vision had that intention to detail. He made something with the understanding of its history and knowing that he perfected it and putting in the time and seeing the future for it, because he's doing things in that restaurant that are just phenomenal. I mean, he's taking old concepts and introducing it to the American palate without scaring away a bunch of people. You know, no living octopus in a beer, or however, like I think it's like living minnows in a beer and they split it. Nothing alarming or startling for the American palate or mindset, but just enough to keep them like entrenched and wondering what he's gonna perform next. Like Japanese pickle maki. Who knew? Anyways.
Well, it's about the Noran curtains that you made for the new restaurant in Acushnet. You were going to this very, very tiny little place that he started, and that's where you really developed the love of his cuisine, but also that's a kind of a situation where you're going to get to know the chef maybe, and over time if you go. And the fact that there's this mutual appreciation, and you know, for what you do also. And when he grew, he thought, well, I'd like to have something from you as an artist in my space. I think that the idea of artists not being rarefied, you know, is an interesting thing. And when you're a sushi chef, you are definitely an artist at what you do. And, you know, there's a sense of respect for other people who are very good at whatever they are skilled to do. And I really like the idea that he asked you to do those, and that they, you know...
it was an honor because it's something that's placed in the entryway of a restaurant so that customers almost have to show respect in a traditional Japanese way of bowing their heads upon entering. Because you have to set the curtain low enough so that the part, if you don't want it touching your head, which most Japanese people don't, you gotta bow to enter a restaurant. And I think that's very, it allowed him to receive the respect he deserves, and honor his history without being forceful.
And I think you know, people wonder sometimes how projects come into being, and there is no project, you know, artists will tell you if you're afraid to get anything from them. There's no project too big, no project too small, and you know, you're just interested in the situation and knowing people well enough that you're communicating with them, and that they are, again, getting that feeling of belonging from what you do. And some artists don't care. I mean, I can remember I spoke with a sound artist at one time, and this interested me because to function as an art form, there must be a listener. And so he said he never cared about the audience. And I thought, what? And so I said, you know, I have to mention to you that you are performing in front of people, you know. So I said there is an audience, and he was saying basically, you know, that he was interested in just working these soundboards and getting these effects and things, and that, you know, if anybody wanted to listen, that was okay. And I can see people working in that way. And he was saying, I don't want to please, I'm not working to please the audience, but I do feel that
I can respect that. I
can too. And it's you know, the Miles Davis school of thought. Basically, Miles Davis would turn around to put his back to the audience and play, and you're interested in the feeling and the world that Miles Davis created, and I think that there is an audience, you know, and there is somebody listening. So the idea is, as you grow as an artist, they are somehow privy to that and are experiencing it and are a part of it. So a person might not care what people think about what they do when they're making it, or even after they've made it, but it still is something that you share. And which brings us to our podcast, which we are sharing, and we really don't know where it's going. We're just, you know, relating ideas and things that we talk about and think about in the studio. Again, it's our coffee time, and
being ourselves for the world.
Yeah, and so it, you know, if we were just working on things like in my studio, which is where we are today, or out in the world seeing something, or these are all the ideas that we would kind of be just chatting about, talking about, and you know, wanting to bring them to you so that it feels, you feel more connected. And I think maybe the first one is kind of stiff, but maybe the other ones will be more relaxed as I get more comfortable with it. I think you're already comfortable with it, and but people have been telling me for years, Suzanne, you should do this. And so I'm doing it, and I think that's nice. And I chatted up most of my interview with you. However, I think, you know, as you do interviews, people will get a clearer sense of who you are also. But I think one of the things, you know, among the things we talked about were materials that you're interested in, scenes that you're interested in, fashion as a vehicle of expression is very much something that you are exploring as an artist. And eventually I think Chaska will make a whole line of clothing, but at the moment she's working on individual pieces, and as that comes together, no matter what artist makes that, whether I'm making something or she's making something, if I'm working toward a show, sometimes I don't exactly know what I'm going to do in the beginning, or I do, but you know, there's no fun to it if you know everything you're going to do and you're just going through the motions. Everything evolves, and that keeps it alive and keeps it real, and that's the fun part. So you have the skill level, but the fun part is what it becomes.
Exactly.
In the process of making, and then in the process of sharing too.
In the spirit of sharing, if you're interested in what we're doing and where we might be going with this podcast, please like and share, subscribe to our channel. We're going to be sticking around for a while, and we understand slow growth, but we hope you follow us through time and space as we explore art in each other's minds.
Yes. So, subscribe and like.
Yes. And share
And
if you
share.
can. Hello, it's me again. Bye.